Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Unfound Now. I am Unfound's host, Ed Densel. Today, I will be discussing the disappearance of Cynthia Bah-Traore. She is a 39-year-old. She's been missing since February 3rd of 2021, so this is a disappearance that is almost 4 months old. She was last seen in her vehicle in Longview, Texas. She is the mother of 2. She is a prenatal counselor, and interestingly enough, she is a podcast host who specializes in Christian theology. You can also find her right here on YouTube, where she has co-hosted a kind of Christian video series within the last couple of years. Before I get started, I want to remind you that I do these Unfound Nows for 2 main reasons. Of course, one is to publicize a disappearance that really has not gotten a lot of attention. That is certainly the situation with Cynthia's. The second reason, though, is to educate all of you and to show you how we at Unfound analyze disappearances that pop up in the news and are what we would call new disappearances. As you probably already know, on Unfound, we have a rule that a disappearance has to be a year old before we will feature it on the program. Whereas with Unfound Now, all I do is cover very recent disappearances starting back in the summer of 2020. And of course, Cynthia's disappearance certainly qualifies as a recent disappearance. So I believe that educating you, the public, and hey, I'm learning all the time as well, that is the best way that many of these disappearances are going to get solved, for the public to become more educated in what goes on in missing persons cases and how to analyze them when they see, or you see, a story on a website, in the newspaper, on WebSleuth, or wherever else, how you can best read what is being said and come to your own conclusions and maybe kind of read between the lines in determining facts that maybe aren't in the story. Also remind you to like this video and subscribe to the Unfound Podcast Channel if you have not yet done so. And please hit the bell so that when videos like this one are uploaded, you will be alerted immediately. I also will ask you to consider contributing at Patreon, patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, and also PayPal, paypal.me/Unfound Podcast. Now, from the discussion of Cynthia's disappearance, there are going to be 3 main points, 3 educational points for this video. Number 1, when the YWHY is missing. Number 2, is the person's last known behavior consistent? And number 3, not all abandoned vehicles are created equal. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to go over to the Google Maps. I'm going to show you the 3 main locations important to Cynthia's disappearance. And then I'll come back and discuss those 3 points in depth using Cynthia's disappearance, of course, as the template, and then also using some of Unfound's own disappearances as examples. Okay, here is the video for the disappearance of Cynthia Bah-Traore. You can see at the top of the screen on using Google Maps, this is Crowley / Fort Worth area up here at the top of the screen. This is where she lived. This is where she worked. And this is the area that her family says they're trying to get the Crowley police more involved. I think a missing persons report has been filled out, but that is about it. And I think that's the reason that they're trying to get a private investigator involved. Once again, I do not believe this is the best choice, my opinion. But so we have Crowley right here, and then here is Grandview. Once again, not Longview, Texas, totally different place. Grandview, Texas, and this is where Cynthia was seen presumably by herself on a video at this Shell station. I can only take for granted that they even found video from this Shell station, because once she went missing, maybe they had the ability to check her credit cards, and that she bought something there. Gas, a drink, candy bars. I don't think anybody knows. Maybe they do know, but I don't think the public knows. But that is my best guess regarding how they figured out she was even here. I cannot believe that there was for example, be on the lookout for Cynthia, and then somebody remembered the car and went back to the video. I'm thinking that they checked her receipts, found that she had stopped in Grandview at that Shell station. Law enforcement shows up there, asks to see the video, and then there she is. Of course, they would know what time to look at for this video. And then, but you see, of course, we have Crowley at the top of the screen. We have Grandview, it's about a half hour, maybe a little more than that, of a drive. But then her car was found way down here at Waco, and I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit. And it was at mile marker 335. And I'm just going to move this over here, approximately right there. Because mile marker 35, exit 335 on Interstate 35, is the exit for Baylor University. Is that a coincidence? I have no idea. But that is where her car was found. It was not found on some side street this way, that way, in a Walmart parking lot or in a Starbucks parking lot or in the Baylor University parking lot. It was found right here on this highway, right in here. We do not know the condition of the vehicle, though. So, of course, well out of the way, if I were to zoom out here, which is what I'm going to do, so you can see this again. You can see what it says on the screen there, right here. It's an hour and 18-minute drive from here to there, with a little over a half hour. It's like 35 minutes here and 50 minutes. I think it breaks down something like that. 30 and 50, 30 minutes, 50 minutes, something like that. But she stopped in here for some reason. Now, it would be interesting to know what she bought, and I'm sure they do know what she bought. If she bought gas, why is she going the whole way down to Grandview to buy gas when she lives up here in Fort Worth? What it would then mean to me is that her full intention was to drive down, continue to go south. The big question is, why wasn't her vehicle then found until 8 days after she disappeared? But that is the map for Cynthia's disappearance. Okay, we are back, and I will jump right into the 3 educational points for Cynthia's disappearance, and I will be mentioning some unfound examples as well. So let's get right to number 1. When the why, quote-unquote why, W-H-Y, is missing. And what I mean by that is, anytime that you read a missing persons article, news on that, you should be looking for the why. Why was that person in that particular area? Why did that person walk off? And many times you're not going to find those reasons. Sometimes you will, sometimes you aren't. But I can tell you that if a family and friends know, they are more than happy to have that written in the article. Well, she was going to see her sister and never made it there. She went to see her brother, and then on the way home, she never made it home. They will give reasons as to why a missing man, a missing woman could have been or would have been in a particular area. It's common. But a lot of times, if you don't see that in the article, mainly it's because nobody knows. And so when I think about Cynthia's and what she was doing in Grandview, Texas, you will not find one piece of information out there as to why she would have been there. She didn't work in the area. Maybe she has friends in the area, but it's not mentioned anywhere. So I'm inclined to believe, once again, my experience is that the reason there is no why in any of these stories is because nobody knows. Her family, her friends, her children don't know why she was in Grandview, Texas, getting gas there. And as I mentioned during in the maps section, I think the only reason they knew she was there is because of her credit card usage, probably at that Shell station. I don't know what she bought, but it wouldn't matter. I'm sure they now know because they can get the receipt. But if she got gas, drinks, candy bars, whatever, they didn't know, and I'm guessing they were surprised that she was in Grandview, Texas, because I think that if they knew the reason she was there, yeah, she was down there seeing a friend and she was going to be coming home, it would be said in those articles, and it surely would have been written on the GoFundMe page, which is the only reason I even know that her vehicle was found. If you look at regular news articles, they would lead you to believe that her car hasn't been found yet, when it has been, and it was it was abandoned. I'll be talking about that. So always be looking for the why. Why was that person in that area? And if it's not mentioned, you can usually take for granted that people don't know. Now, there are some examples in Unfound's history of cases of 4.5 years, over 200 disappearances, where we've run into some similar situations, so you can kind of compare those to Cynthia's. Pamela Golden, she disappeared back in the 1990s from Arkansas. She was working with her sister at a flower shop. Pamela was going to be helping a friend move. She wanted to go get some boxes. Her sister Rita told her, pull out of this parking lot, make a left, and there's a liquor store down there, and you'll be able to get boxes there. Pamela leaves, gets in her truck, pulls out. Instead of going left like Rita said, her sister said, she made a right, never to be seen again. Totally unexplainable. I mean, it was literally 10 minutes between Rita saying that and Pamela leaving, and she went the complete opposite direction. To this day, nobody knows why. Another good example of this, Al Copper. This disappearance is very close to me, I guess, emotionally, because this happened very close to where I grew up in Leechburg, Pennsylvania, a place called Avonmore that's even smaller than Leechburg. But Al was supposed to be on his way to work that morning that he disappeared, and he would have been going generally in a north direction. Instead, very much like Cynthia, he was found in a complete opposite direction at a convenience store in a southwest direction. He should have been going north. He went southwest. And his car was eventually found, but not near that convenience store. And I've actually been to the location where his car was found. No explanation as to why Al went in a southwest direction when he should have been going in a north direction to work. And that's a disappearance that's not quite 10 years old yet. And then we have Ronald McNutt. This is a unique disappearance in Unfound's catalog in that it is believed that Ronald has been found, but his remains, the DNA testing, I guess, is still going on, even though it's been like 4 years. Ronald was supposed to be going to work. He didn't show up. He goes missing. And then, I don't have it in front of me, but a couple years later, a forest fire sweeps through the area in Northern California. We hear about those all the time. And afterwards, a truck with remains in it is found down over this cliff on this mountain road in Northern California. The truck is identified as being Ronald's, and it is believed that it's he in this vehicle, although once again, DNA tests have still not been done or not completed. It's a little hard to believe. But there's no why as to what he was doing out there in the first place. There's no why as to why he was on that road, why he went over the cliff. No insights whatsoever at all. And of those disappearances, that Ronald McNutt's, I think we covered that I think in 2019, later in 2019, I believe, if you'd like to check that one out. Al's and Pamela's are older disappearances, older episodes, I should say, from 2018 and 2017. But all situations where a person went in a direction and was in an area that he or she should not have been in, or in a direction he or she shouldn't have been, should have been going. They shouldn't have been there. But that's what they did. Same way with Cynthia, it seems that no reason as to why she was in Grandview that night, but she was. So always be looking for the why, and if it's not there, it usually means people don't know. The next, number 2, educational point, is who the person is just as important as analyzing the facts. So this is the reason when we do interviews for the program, when I do interviews for the program, we will spend a lot of time covering who that person is. What was going on in that person's life? Did they have any drug addictions, any mental illness, family? How was work going? Any beefs with anybody? Relationships? All of that information is at least as important as the facts on the day of the disappearance. You learn very quickly in doing this, as many interviews that I've done, knowing the missing person can solve a lot of the issues when it comes to trying to decode the facts. So when I look at Cynthia and what I think I know about her, I've never talked to anybody in her family, but she's a podcaster. And the name of her podcast is Be a Better Human. I would call it a Christian-based podcast. And what caught my attention as a podcaster is that she was not doing this professionally. This is not something that she was doing every day or even every week. This is something that she kind of did off and on, maybe doing it for fun. Maybe she had some listeners, expressing her faith, reading from the Bible, all fine by me. But as a podcaster, what really caught my attention, though, is that she started this in 2019, and it was a little sporadic. She'd do like 2 days in a row, and then she'd take off 2 weeks, and then take off a month, and then be 2 weeks later. Very much like how people who are doing this, just amateurs, recreational podcasters, that's how they do it. And that's fine. But in June of 2020, I listened to that particular podcast. And she said that she would be having another podcast come out the next week. Didn't happen. And in fact, she didn't do another podcast for 6 months. And then at the beginning of this year of 2021, she started up again. And I listened to that one too. So I listened to the last one before this break, and I listened to the first one after the break, the 6-month break. And no explanation as to why she took those 6 months off. This catches my attention. I would think that is very irregular, even for somebody in a recreational position to do that. She didn't change the name of the podcast. She didn't change the format. She didn't change the content. Nothing. It was if those 6 months never existed. It's like she just went from June to January, no explanation for anything in between. So, I don't know. Was she not able to? I don't know. Was she going through something during that time? I don't think that she was in jail, because I've checked her criminal record, and there are no records she spent any time in jail anywhere for anything during her life, 39 years. But it does catch my attention. What could something have been going on? Now, we know that 2020 was a crazy year. Kind of trailed over here into 2021, and we're slowly getting back to normal. But she was in the medical field, prenatal care, and maybe that had something to do with it. She was too busy. The emotional toll of doing her job under the past 12 months certainly could be an explanation, certainly. And I completely understand it. But she doesn't say that when she came back in January. Now, I can understand maybe why she started to do the podcast again New Year's resolution. Okay, I've taken some time off. I want to get back into this. January, I'm starting it again. And I get that. But it would also seem to me that that would go along with a little explanation of where she's been for 6 months. And do that. Now, once she started doing them again in January, weekly. First week, second week, third week, fourth week of January. And in fact, her last podcast was the day before she went missing. Now, I had a chance to listen to 2 podcasts in 2020, and then I listened to the first one of 2021, and then the last one she did before she went missing. Pretty much all the same person. No change in content, no change in personality, no change in demeanor, no change in her talking. Her personality seemed pretty consistent. And dare I say it, it's fairly mainstream Christian stuff. This is not Heaven's Gate cult, nothing about the end of the world, the world's going to end, and talking about how all of you are sinners are going to hell, nothing like that. Very positive. And as the title of the podcast says, be a better human. And that surely was the tone of the podcast. So all in all, it's very good. Still have a big question about those missing 6 months, though. And what does that say about her? Something going on in her life? And could those 6 months of no podcasts be connected to her disappearance? Now, you should also know she co-hosted a video program on YouTube in 2018 into 2019, although she did not do a lot of talking. The show is called The Talk of Life Talk Show with Elma, and Elma pretty much does most of the talking. But there is another way, if you'd like to see Cynthia, maybe get an idea of her demeanor, her personality, it's a good way to do it. And it also is Christian-based, having to do with church, Christianity, scripture, applying your faith to your everyday life. That's what the videos are about as well. Now, some examples of people who, once again, looking at the person, did their behavior change? Was something going on in that person's life? Could this 6 months of no podcasting have something to do with her disappearance? I would give you some examples from Unfound's catalog. Keith Fetter, who, good guy. The day he went missing, he showed up at his ex-wife's for a party. He was with some friends, and he was in a great mood. And then within a second, his personality changed. He kind of got a little crazed. He was rushed back into the car. He left with friends. They get down to the end of the street. He jumps out of the car, runs off into the woods, never to be seen again. And we're going to be covering a disappearance here next Friday, June 4th, where there's even a more crisper example of a behavior change. So if we're thinking about a behavior change, some mentality change in Cynthia, maybe it can be connected to her podcasting, something like that. Patty Action, a young woman who's known to be very friendly, attractive, educated, just everything positive going for her. And she showed up to meet some coworkers, and this is a Clearwater, Florida disappearance I've been by many times, where she disappeared, although it's not the same place anymore. But she showed up to meet some friends at a bar at a hotel. And when hotels had bars. And she ordered a drink, left the bar, never came back again. So once again, a change in behavior. No announcement that she was even going to leave, but she did. Her car was later found abandoned. And this is a disappearance that over 40 years, still unsolved. And then Jesse Ross, once again, a young man who's known as being very personable, good kid, educated, worked hard, smart, a lot of great things going on for him. He goes to Chicago for a class trip in college, and on the last night of this trip, at 1:30 in the morning, he just walks out of this room where this forum is going on, never to be seen again. That's been over 15 years ago now, and that disappearance is still unsolved. Now, in looking at these 3 particular examples, in Keith Fetter's, I'm inclined to believe that he ran off into the woods and something happened to him and it wasn't foul play. Patty Action, in particular, I do believe that something of a foul play nature did happen to her. Although I'm not sure what and how that necessarily happened, given the facts that we know about her disappearance. With Jesse, I think a lot of people do believe that he was murdered, but I am not one of those people. So it just depends. When people's behavior changes, they do something that is unexpected. It doesn't necessarily mean there was foul play involved. It could be they had some mental episode and just ran off and something, an accident or something happened. Now, before I move on to point number 3, though, I do need to mention something about that last podcast that Cynthia did. In it, and it's not very long, she mentions talking to some man about Christian faith, about scripture, something like that. But she's very nebulous, very vague. And this catches my attention because this is not how I usually handle those types of situations on Unfound. Not on Unfound Now, not on the live show, not on the episodes that come out every Friday. When I talk about people who I know, friends of mine, I usually at least say their first names. I may not use their last names, but I'll say, yeah, my buddy Doug, one of my best friends of all time. We went to high school together, and we went to the Iron Maiden concert together in 2019. Or my friend Shay, who I've known for over 20 years. One of my closest female friends ever. She came to visit me in 2019, and we had a great time, and I talked to her once in a while. Once again, never mentioning her last name, even though I know a lot of people do know her last name, but this is how I talk about people in my life. Disc golfers, Cameron, Trevor, Kevin, whoever they are. I mention them, and I think people get a good feeling for who these people are. She didn't do that. So I begin to wonder, why was she vague about this? Did she not want to give people the idea that this guy might be a boyfriend? Was she trying to keep kind of on the down low her private life? I don't know, but for me as a missing persons expert, I see a connection between a woman talking about a guy and she's very vague about him and then her going missing the next day. Just can't help doing it. It's just where my mind goes after over 200 disappearances. I would urge you to go find that last podcast she did on February 2nd of 2021 and listen to it for yourself and see what you think. So there's that. All right, let's move on to educational point number 3, and that is not all abandoned cars are created equal. I'm going to guess a lot of you who pay attention to missing persons cases and articles, there's a lot of stories out there about vehicles being abandoned. And what I think you need to know, though, is not all abandoned cars are created equal. We have to look at the circumstances. We have to look at how they were found. We have to look at why they were found. How long did it take to find them? What condition they were in? All of these things matter when trying to analyze a missing persons case. I'll give you, probably a very good example, one of the best examples in Unfound's catalog, and that is Zoe Campos. Coincidentally, another disappearance from Texas where she in her car, she drove over to meet this guy she just met, Carlos Rodriguez, and then she went missing. Carlos claimed at the time that, she left and she never came back. I don't know what to tell you. But days later, Zoe's aunt, coincidentally, was driving along one night and saw Zoe's car. Started following it, became a car chase. The person driving the car went into an apartment complex, left the car, locked it up, ran off, and the person was not caught. The car was analyzed. There was, I think, a sweatshirt in it, some things, but nobody really believed that it was Zoe driving her car. 5 years later, it was determined that Carlos Rodriguez had murdered Zoe. He had buried her in his backyard. and that he was the one who was driving her car that night. This was days after she went missing. So the car was dumped in this apartment complex, and of course they got the car back, but at the time they did not know, law enforcement, nobody knew who was driving it. It was Carlos, but it took 5 years to figure this all out, and you can go listen to that episode, and I've talked about Zoe Campus's murder quite often, and Carlos is going to be on trial for murder, I think, some point this year. So the car was abandoned, a particular set of circumstances. Well, with Cynthia, what catches my ear or my eyes, it's kind of the same thing. She goes missing on the 3rd, but her car is not discovered on a highway until 8 days later. Now, I could understand if the car had not been found for 8 days, if it was on some back street, if it was on some logging road, if somebody had pushed it into a lake, if it had been pushed over the side of a mountain or something like that, certainly. But it's hard to believe that her car sat on the side of that highway from February 3rd to at least February 11th, and it didn't register to anybody. We all know that law enforcement does not allow cars to sit on highways for a week, especially in an urban area like Waco, Texas. What it means is probably somebody was driving that car during that time and then ditched it on that highway for some reason. And this is when we get into the particulars of the car. Was it out of gas? That would explain why it got ditched there. Was it not in running condition? Had the engine blown up? Did it have a flat tire? Did the tranny go out? Something. The transmission, blow up? Something like that. What was the condition of the car? Moreover, was there anything inside the car that could point them toward foul play? Or does it actually look like Cynthia was the last person to be driving the car? I think what stretches my imagination is that on February 3rd, Cynthia drove down there, ditched the car right there, and took off, and then that car sat there for at least 8 days. I just don't believe that. I believe somebody was driving it, and it probably was not Cynthia. Just to be honest. In contrast to maybe some other disappearances that we've covered on the program, where cars have been, that we've talked about on the program, a little bit different. Kind of the same, but not exactly. For example, Eric Alvarado, he disappeared from Texas, but his car was found over the border in Arkansas. On a highway, but out in the middle of nowhere. That makes a difference. Whether a car is found on a highway in the city or it's found out in the middle of nowhere on a highway makes a big difference. Moreover, Eric's car was out of gas. In addition, his dogs had been in the car, and they had both gotten hit by cars in the time it took to find the car, and they were both killed. The keys were hanging on a fence nearby, and one of his sandals was also on the road, along with like a ticket that a police officer would put on a car to mark it as being abandoned. Doesn't seem like we have any of that in Cynthia's situation. Once again, I think if there were some more clues like keys or something, I think they would have been mentioned at least on the GoFundMe page. So even though Eric's and Cynthia's disappearances may seem similar, the car abandonment situation is vastly different. And you should know, in Eric's disappearance, I'm inclined to believe that he did leave his car there. And yes, allowed his dogs to get hit by cars. That's my belief. His family feels differently, and that's totally fine. Greg Brooks, a disappearance from the 1990s. He disappeared from Castleberry, Florida. He had gone out. He worked at a theater. I think he was going to eat, and I think he was going to go to work, didn't show up. Or maybe he went to work to get a check and then went to get some food, and he was supposed to come home, never came home. His car was eventually found over here in the Tampa area, whereas Castleberry is on the other side of Orlando. His car was found along the side of the road, I guess kind of like Cynthia's, but his car was found fairly quickly, even though it was, 80 miles from where he lives. It was identified fairly quickly. So it seems nobody was driving his car around. I could perfectly believe that something happened to him in Castleberry and somebody drove it over here to the Tampa area and abandoned it. Could believe that, but still not exactly the same as Cynthia's. Rebecca Henderson, her car was abandoned, found on a logging road. Everything that was inside the car was on the outside of the car, as if somebody just threw the stuff out. In that situation, I do not believe that she left the car there, but it certainly was an attempt to put the car in an area where it would not easily be found. Jake LaChalais, his car was found on a bridge. Some people believe that it was staged there, that Jake really did not jump off that bridge. Maybe. But certainly it could lead us to the idea that he did, making it look like a suicide situation. So once again, that's another car that's sitting on a highway somewhere, but it's on a bridge. Causes us to go in a different direction other than Cynthia's. And then maybe the best example of how we can never rule anything out when it comes to abandoned cars, Eric Franks. Technically, his car was abandoned. And the mother of his child, her name is Kendra, ended up gifting Eric's vehicle to an older gentleman who she was taking care of, kind of a caregiver. And his car sat in that old man's garage for almost 10 years until it was found last year, totally by accident. And surely this means that foul play happened to Eric Franks. There's no doubt about that. So in each of all these situations that I've just named, all abandoned car situations, all vastly different, leading us to different conclusions on each one of them. And so we have to remember that. So you hear about Cynthia's disappearance. You know that she was in Grandview, Texas. You know that that her car was then abandoned in Waco, Texas. It doesn't necessarily mean what you think. We need more facts. You need to look at it a little more deeply than just saying all abandoned car disappearances are the same. They aren't. My belief is that a majority of the time, the vehicles are not left by the owner. It's my general attitude. I would say it's like 75-25. 75% of the time, I believe that the car was left by somebody else, meaning it was probably foul play. And then in the other 25%, for example, like Eric Alvarado's, was probably a person going through some stuff. And maybe he was feeling suicidal. Maybe there's some sort of mental illness, bipolar disorder, something like that. But 75% of the time, I'm usually pretty sure that the car was not left by the owner. Once again, like Zoe Campos, like Eric Franks, like Rebecca Henderson. It all depends on other issues that could be going on in the disappearance. The abandonment of the car cannot just be looked at by itself. And I would also say that the longer it takes for a missing car to be found, much like Cynthia's, where it took at least 8 days, the less likely the owner put it there. So, especially in high visibility places, going back to, it's hard to believe that Cynthia, seen in Grandview, Texas, then was driving all around Waco and everywhere else for several days, and then just decided to abandon her car on the side of I-35 in Waco. It's a little hard to believe. So, that's my analysis of the disappearance of Cynthia Bah. I'm going to get this right. And I want you to know I picked this disappearance even though I knew it was going to be a hard name to pronounce, simply because I believe it's a very important disappearance. I hope she is found alive and well, and I think it's a good illustration. We can learn a lot from this particular disappearance, and so I decided to pick this one even though I knew I was going to have a problem with the name, but it's Cynthia Bah-Traore. Is her name, and I think her maiden name is Alvoid, Alvoid. So once again, she disappeared, last seen in Grandview, Texas, not Longview, Texas, and if I said Longview at any point during this video, I apologize. It's Grandview. She was 39 years old. She is 39 years old, and she's been missing since February 3rd, 2021. Her car was found in the Waco area on Highway I-35 at mile marker 335. Sometime between February 11th and February 15th. So that's this Unfound Now for May of 2021. I thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you sometime in June. Thanks for watching.